Alrighty, let's take a look at phase two of project one. And you've already been through the awareness section, right? You've kind of played around with exploring different ads and how they might incorporate these different concepts. So now it's time for you to do it, right? So what we're going to do here is you're going to select three concepts from the above list. All right. And you're going to be using black, gray, and white, basically just like what you were doing up here in phase one. And these shapes are going to represent images, headlines, individual letters, lines of body text, blah, 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 right? You can read that on your own. And you're going to execute three new designs for each concept. So in other words, say you picked anomaly, radiation, and concentration, say. You would be doing three new designs for each of those three concepts. Okay? Then when we turn these in, we'll look at the strongest designs, and we'll pick two of the strongest compositions per concept, and then we'll refine those possibilities and tighten things up. So basically what we'll do is we'll take a look at these at the next class period, and then we'll pick the best two of each concept, and then we'll say, hey, let's move that, let's tighten that up, let's add or subtract whatever we need to do to make it strong enough so that we can move these on to phase three. Okay, so let's take a look at some sample work from past semesters and how some students have solved the problem. Now remember that sometimes the student didn't get the concept right. Like for example, here it says anomaly, misspelled by the way, the O is in the middle, right there. I know. And so they set up this diagonal design and then made one thing different. Now this can certainly work. The design is very powerful. The anomaly is rather weak, but say that was something that was red, it might work just fine. Okay, in a situation like this, they're setting up a sort of a regular structure, and then the anomaly is some different kind of shape or some different kind of element. So what these represent is essentially pretty much anything you want them to do. These don't necessarily have to end up being rectangles per se. They could be just objects, right? For example, they could be, three perfume bottles that were the same and then one that was different, right? So these are some things that you can think about. So I don't want you to focus on what these are going to become. I'd rather you just focus on trying to get a good composition using the shapes and thinking about the concepts. But eventually, obviously, we are going to have to turn those into real designs. So here, anomaly, this could work. This area would represent a texture. I don't necessarily need you to do that. If you just want an area that's going to be something, just put it in a gray. Okay, so you don't have to get that involved in it. If you want to use something in the background, for example, for a reason for contrast of value or contrast of color or something like that, just put a gray area in there. You don't have to play around with textures, okay? And you look at this and where's the anomaly? I don't know. Maybe it's this triangle here, but the structure doesn't quite work because this looks like it's bleeding off. And so if these were three rectangles and one rectangle was bleeding off, it wouldn't necessarily work. But again, I don't really want you to focus on getting it right, but I want you to take a crack at getting it so that it looks like a good composition. Okay, so here concentration works very well. And, oops, wrong key. Concentration works very well here, right? Everything is focused on the bottom and there's a little bit at the top. So it brings our eye back and forth across the composition. The same thing's happening there, right? So these would essentially be two variations of the same design. So as you start thinking about working multiple versions of these, you don't have to come up with three completely different things. You can come up with three variations of the same elements, So here, this was more simple. Here it got more complex, but you can see that they're essentially the same elements, just, moved around. So I think it's important that you think about working variations of the design rather than working completely different, okay? Here, I'm not sure why it got so big, but again, you can see that it's an iteration, right? Here's where it was a little simpler. Here it got more complex. And that's an easy way to get through 3 designs is to work through 3 variations of a given scenario. Okay. Here's it's concentration. It's almost more an anomaly because all of these rectilinear shapes and then these 3 circular shapes. So it's pretty powerful in the difference. It could be contrast rather than anomaly because the pattern's not really broken. So it could be contrast as well. Remember that sometimes these concepts aren't perfectly clear, or sometimes they blend between 1 or 2 other concepts. So keep that in mind as you're working through your designs, okay? Here, obviously, this is probably where it sort of started, and that's might have been where it ended up, right? And here again, variation on a theme. So it's not hard to work through these quickly. Gradation, right? That's happening in here. So, again, that could end up being, 4 different things that get larger. It could be the same thing in repetition that gets larger, then it turns into gradation. So, again, don't focus on that, but, you might just think in your mind, keep it sort of in the back there somewhere. Okay, so gradation would be these triangles here at the bottom. It could work, and remember, gradation can be a gradation of color. It can be a gradation of value. It can be a gradation of size. It can be a gradation of position. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to make gradation work. So then let's, keep going here. Gradation, right? We can see these circular shapes getting larger in size. So that can work. And this is a really pretty study. It's very simple, but it really does a nice job of being minimal, right? And so is it really an anomaly? Probably more contrast, but that's okay. I don't mind the idea. And here again, variation on a theme, right? So it's kind of nice the way that works. And here's another variation, a simple one. I would suggest that if you're thinking about elements being body text, if it's there in the back of your mind somewhere, you can use multiple linear elements rather than larger elements. But if you're not sure, then just make them larger and then we can break them down into text later. Remember also that the designs don't necessarily have to translate exactly the same. You can drop some elements, you can move elements, and so on. And so these are just designed to get you started. Okay, so here's another variation on that theme, right? So that's a very nice study of variations. So just kind of keep that in mind, okay? Then let's see. This is also a nice study. This shouldn't be red, it should be black, but that's okay. So look at these 4 different designs, variations on a theme 5. But it works, right? So that's the whole idea, is I want you to work through some variations. Here's some other nice rectilinear designs. You can't go wrong with rectilinear. It's a very powerful way of making design work. Here, this is repetition, so clearly they're probably thinking about the repetition of some kind of shape. So that could work. And then this is probably overly complex. But I wanted to show it to you just to show that things can get too far, but we'd probably eliminate this design in our next review, right? So this is also a nice little variation, right? Not a whole lot of difference, but makes a big difference when you actually look at how the composition works. So that's essentially the way I want you to approach this phase 2 of the project, okay? Don't think about how it's going to translate, just make a really good composition, but in the back of your mind, keep the idea that, okay, this could be body text, this could be a shape, this could be an image, whatever, right? And don't be afraid of going into organic shapes. There's a lot of organic elements that could be represented by these organic shapes. They could be faces, hands, they could be bottles that have, curvilinear shapes and forms. So, there's a lot of ways that you can think about that. As well, holding down something with, just a rectangle doesn't mean you can't put an organic shape in there. It's just holding down the space and saying there's going to be something here. Okay, so I hope this video helps to clarify where to go next. On the website, you'll see a small slideshow of phase 3, where the designer took the black and white final and extrapolated that to a real design. So that gives you an idea of where it can go. But again, I don't want you to focus on that, okay? So hope this helps.